across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. This first hour, we're going to spend some time talking about how to get emotionally healthy and spiritually healthy. And that is something we've talked about from time to time on this program, but I'm excited about this particular package of material. Those of you that are in positions of leadership, if you're a pastor, you're a Sunday school teacher, you're a Bible fellowship leader, you're going to want to know about this. All of us, of course, are going to benefit from these resources, but I especially want to talk about some of the ways in which, as a leader, you can help people in your sphere of influence. It could be your congregation, it could be your Bible study, it could be your small group, it could be your Sunday school class, whatever it might be. And I might just also mention that those of you that watch online as well as listen online, you might go to our website, pointofview.net. You can watch the program because they're going to be holding up some of the books, the DVDs, and other resources. Or you can also, of course, watch us as well on Facebook Live, where we also broadcast. So throughout the program, those of you watching right now, I'm going to hold up this particular package here, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship Courses. This is a leader's kit, and we're going to be working our way through all of this. But let me first of all introduce our guest who is responsible for this, and it is Pete Scazzero. He is a founder of the New Life Fellowship Church, and has been involved with that for many years in Queens. After serving as the senior pastor for 26 years, now serves as the teaching pastor at large. You may be familiar with some of his books. For example, The Emotionally Healthy Leader, The Emotionally Healthy Church, of course, the one that we'll be talking about today, The Emotionally Healthy Spirituality Day by Day, the Relationships Course, and a number of other things. He is certainly an individual well-known. 250,000 copies of that Emotionally Healthy Spirituality book that are sold, so you perhaps are familiar with him, but if not, let's introduce him. And Peter, it's just a delight to have you on the program with us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you very much. Great to be with you.
Let's, if we can, talk about how you got into all of this. I know you were a pastor, and you've been concerned about some of this, but even in your book that I think so many people probably are familiar with, you have a chapter there about the problem of emotionally unhealthy spirituality. As a pastor and as someone who has literally traveled the world, tell us how you came to begin to see some of these problems and begin to design a course to solve some of those problems.
Well, Kerb, I'd like to say that I saw the problem in everybody else, and so I found a solution. But that wouldn't be the truth. I came in this kicking and screaming because of some of the gaps in my own life as a leader and as a Christ follower. I attended the best seminaries. I had a great theological education, all the best leadership conferences, planted a church. I had been a Christian at this point 17 years, but I hit a wall. And it was clear that my own discipleship, my own formation in Christ, there were some gaps and areas that were still untouched. And so cracks began to come in the foundation of my own life and my own marriage, and I was observing them in our church as well. It seemed like we were recycling the same old problems. As one friend said to me, I was a 22-year-old Christian, but really I was a 1-year-old Christian 22 times. And I realized not just around me was everybody apparently recycling the same problems and stuck. I was personally stuck.
Sure.
And so God finally got my attention through some crises and through some pain to open me up to say, oh, maybe God does want to take me to some new places and reveal some new things to me.
And again, some of the things that you've shared, since you have shared them, I think they're public knowledge. Avoided healthy conflict in the name of keeping peace. I think most of us that go into ministry sometimes tend to be people pleasers and try to have peace at any cost, and sometimes suppressing emotions, and sometimes living without limits, not finding any kind of margin in our lives. And any person that's in a position of leadership has to at least say, okay, I can check off at least one, two, maybe all those boxes that you just mentioned. And that's why I think this particular emotionally healthy discipleship course is important, certainly for leaders, but I think all of us can benefit from some of the material we're going to be sharing today.
Absolutely. I mean, I think for me, I realized that I was going way too fast in my own leadership. building too quickly, and I was winning the world, and my own soul was just dried out, and the yoke of Jesus felt heavy and hard, not light and easy. So that was my life was just too busy. So really, God got my attention about slowing down, with Him. And then secondly, I was very unaware of how my family of origin had impacted my own life. And so my discipleship never got into what I call deep beneath the surface issues on the iceberg. And so through a crisis, one of our church that we had planted had a split, and I found myself very angry, very grieving, but I didn't have any ability to integrate my grief, my loss. Even though the Bible has a whole book called Lamentations, and 2/3 of the Psalms are griefs, I didn't have any ability to integrate that into my spirituality. So I was really stuck. I wasn't feeling very loving. I wasn't very loving because I was very angry, and that was a crisis for me. And then thirdly, my marriage wasn't going well. I mean, Jerry was my wife. We had 4 small girls at the time, and she felt lonely because I was so busy building the church. And again, I wasn't really very self-aware. And so we loved each other. We'd been friends 8 years before we got married, but she was, she was communicating her unhappiness to me. And that was a shock because we were both Christians on fire for Jesus. And so I just realized I had some big issues for me that I had to deal with. And that got me on this whole journey we call Emotionally Healthy Discipleship today. And that was 22 years ago. But God met us.
Yeah, and I might just mention that you and your wife are the co-authors of this, Peter and Jerry Scazzero. And again, we're going to be talking about this leadership kit because it involves emotionally healthy spirituality as well as emotionally healthy relationships, 2 8-week DVDs, 2 8-session workshops and workbooks, 2 40-day-by-day books, all sorts of other material, including, of course, the book I just mentioned a second ago, The Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And as somebody begins to read some of this material, and we've got a link to your website, we'll talk more about that in just a minute, they will notice that there's 2 sections, one on emotionally healthy spirituality and another one on emotionally healthy relationships. The 2 are related, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus made it very clear they're very related, didn't he? I mean, that was the big clash with the Pharisees and Sadducees, that they were very interested in loving God, right? I mean, they were tithing and fasting and praying. They were doing all that stuff, but they weren't very loving people. And they said, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus refused to say it's just loving God. He says, no, it's loving God, but the second is like the first, it's loving your neighbor. And so we found that we don't disciple people. And how do you love people? I mean, how do you change the way you do conflict, the way you speak, the way you listen? How do you actually change the way you come off to people? And you're soft and approachable and merciful like Jesus. And we realized that was a discipleship issue. And the Pharisees didn't want to go down that road. They couldn't be bothered. And yet the real evidence of our maturity in Christ is the way we love. I mean, Jesus was very clear about that.
Yes.
And so we made this essential part, just like Jesus did. Loving God is the first course, all about how do I grow in that. The second one is how do I grow in loving for people. And it's big.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation today, talking about some of the books you may have seen, like Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, but this is part of a leader's kit, which you may want to use for your family, for your small group, for your church. Emotionally Healthy Discipleship courses, published by Zondervan. We have all sorts of information on our website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Can a state government compel speech? That is a question that surfaced in the Supreme Court case involving a Christian baker. It came up again last week when the same court heard oral arguments about a California law that compels pro-life pregnancy centers to promote abortion. Pro-life people with religious objections to abortion run these centers. But this case is much more than a religious liberty case. It is fundamentally a First Amendment free speech case. The law forces the pro-life centers to provide free advertisement for abortions through their posters and their websites. You would think that a federal court would strike down the law, but not the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that columnist George Will reminds us has reasoning that is frequently novel and rulings that are frequently reversed. To show the problem with the law, he poses this hypothetical. Suppose a pro-life state government were to require all publicly and privately funded abortion providers to advertise on their premises the locations and services of crisis pregnancy centers, or even to post the following accurate information on their premises, websites, and advertisements. That would be such facts as the baby's brain forms after 18 days. The heart begins to beat after 13 weeks, and the brain waves are detected after 6 weeks. At 7 weeks, the baby is kicking. At week 9, the baby can suck its thumb. At 26 weeks, the spinal cord and pain receptors are in place and the baby can feel pain. Of course, the abortion providers would howl with anger at such requirements, but essentially that is what the California legislature did by requiring pro-life pregnancy centers to promote abortion. Hopefully, the High Court will understand that this is an important free speech issue and strike down the California law. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films, Paul, Apostle of Christ, starring Jim Caviezel, rated PG-13, now playing. Information at paulmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Peter Scazzero with us today as we talk about the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship courses, and in particular focusing on emotionally healthy spirituality. Let me, for just a minute before we get into some of the resources, talk about your website, Peter, because we have a link to emotionallyhealthy.org. One of the things I think is helpful there is that people can sign up for all sorts of resources, but also there's a section called Find a Course. I do hope that many of our listeners want to actually develop this for their own church, but if some of our listeners say, well, I haven't been able to get my pastor interested yet, but I'd still like to go through the course, they can click on that button and find where maybe that course is being taught right now in a neighborhood right next to them.
Yes, absolutely. I would encourage them to do that. Probably a nice way to start is on that front page also is a little 20-minute assessment of, am I an emotional infant, child, adolescent, or an adult? And it's a nice little assessment, and people really enjoy that. You get a sense of, okay, this is the kind of things we're talking about, And so I'd encourage people to take that little free assessment. And there's a nice little 2-minute video, and you hop on there about what is this emotional discipleship. And, I'd watch that as well. But, yes, absolutely, they can do this themselves, but you got to get trained. And we'll talk about that, hopefully, as we go on here.
We certainly will.
This is not simply a plug and play like other typical curriculums. This is you've got to get a little bit of training to actually do it. So we actually offer these very short 3-hour seminars, and how do you bring this to your church ministry, group? But we're going after serious discipleship, beneath the surface, not superficial, shallow. We're talking about where Christ actually has access to your whole life, letting him in so that there can be some serious change, deep formational change in Jesus for the rest of your life.
Again, let me encourage all of you just to maybe take that personal assessment. Just need to put your name and material there, and then you can find out if you're an emotional infant, child, teen, or adult. And let's, if we can, take people through just a brief overview so they can kind of see what that will entail. One of the things you talk about in your book and also in the workbook is know yourself that you may know God. This is the idea of your authentic self. Yeah. It's interesting because we've grown up in this idea that, as Christians, we have to focus on God. We have to focus on others. We shouldn't pay attention to ourselves. But early on, you actually talk about the importance of really understanding who you are, not your false self, but your true self. Explain.
Yes. I'll just give an example of David. In Scripture, David was a tremendous leader, a man after God's own heart. And just think of his life, his very unique life. I mean, he goes up against Goliath, but he's a shepherd. That's who he is. Everyone else they are facing Goliath in their soldier outfits and Delta Force and all that. But he goes and fights Goliath with a slingshot. He doesn't try to be Saul. He takes off Saul's armor. He doesn't try to fight with other people's ways that they would fight. He's himself, and so he's his unique self. He knows God, but he also knows who he is. And so he's able to pick up a few stones. He's fought a lion and a bear, and he charges. And it's a beautiful example of he doesn't live somebody else's life. He knows God, and he follows God's authentic plan for him. In the same way, you think of Jesus. Jesus resisted the pressure of everybody around him to be somebody different, but he knows the Father's love, and he's able to resist the pressure of his family, the disciples, the crowds, the Pharisees, and live out the Father's authentic life for him, and he does the Father's will. In the same way, each of us is different. We have different callings, with different temperaments, personalities. There's nobody like you on the face of the earth, or like me. And so it's got to unfold out of a unique prism of how God's made us. Well, that's not easy because everyone's got a plan for our lives, right? And it's just so easy. It's easy to copy other people's expectations for us, or what they want to see us be like, versus, God, how are you inviting me to flesh out, again, under Scripture, because I know you, God, in your power to live out my God-given life. And that's what we're after here. Is like, so it's not just knowing God, it is knowing yourself. And the two are so interrelated. And what's interesting is this was talked about by Augustine and Calvin and throughout church history. For some reason, though, it became like, oh, that's a morbid introspection. But we find it in Scripture, and we find it in history that this interrelation of knowing yourself, self-awareness, is very interwoven with knowing God.
Yes.
And so it's very powerful when you tap into it.
Sure. So it's important to know yourself. Another point that you alluded to, and you also teach about that as well, is knowing your family of origin. You talk about going back in order to go forward. Yep. If there is one myth that has been so perpetuated in the North American, especially the American culture, it is that I can start anew, and it doesn't matter what family you come from. As I try to teach my kids, and now I'll try to teach my granddaughter, you are marrying into a family whether you believe it or not. Tell us more.
Absolutely. We like to say that Jesus may be in your hair, but Grandpa's in your bones. And, salvation's a gift. And Jesus died for our sins. We're celebrating Good Friday and Easter. He is risen from the dead. I mean, it's sheer grace that the Lord loves the world. He gave his only Son. So it's a welcome. Come in. And we're born anew into the new family of Jesus. That's the great miracle of the gospel and Christianity. But now discipleship is learning, how do I live in this new family of Jesus? How do I function? But we all come from families of origin. We all come from cultures. And the Bible talks about the sins of the fathers being passed on to the third and fourth generation. And so what that means is that what happens in one generation tends to repeat in the other. And so you see in families, for example, over generations, things like alcoholism or drug addiction or mental illness or children born out of wedlock or inability to maintain steady relationships. And it's almost uncanny when you look at it. But the Bible talks about it. We see this in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as not just the blessings are passed on from generation to generation, but also sibling rivalry, unhealthy marriages, favoritism. It's just a biblical principle. But the beautiful thing is that when we come to Christ, there's now a whole new future for us. But we have to go back to go forward. What that means is you have to identify what are the areas of my life in the past that are holding me back from what God has for me in my future. And so, again, I never looked at that for the first 17 years of my discipleship. No one ever talked about it. I used to say to my wife, I'd say, Jerry, she'd say, tell me about your family. I had a very, like many, I had a painful past. And Jerry would say, tell me about your past, Pete, my family. And I said, I don't want to talk about it. I'm a new creation in Jesus. And she'd say, no, you're not. I live with you. And, so for example, how you do marriage, how you do affection, how you do sexuality, how you do anger.
Conflict resolution. Yeah.
Oh, my God, that's a classic, right?
Yeah, it sure is.
And so what happens, you bring it into all your relationships in the present. So that's why we teach in our relationships course, how do you do a clean fight versus dirty fighting? We say in the new family of Jesus, we don't do dirty fighting. In the new family of Jesus, we speak clearly, directly, and respectfully and honestly. We don't lie in the new family of Jesus. And what people do is that we justify it, and how does your family define success? For some people it's making a lot of money, it's getting degrees. Well, Jesus defines success as becoming the person God calls you to become and doing what God calls you to do. Well, the problem is if you're unaware of what's in your bones, then you're not bringing that to Jesus to be changed. And so what we have is lots of folks who, let's say, conflict or in our churches, but they've never learned to do conflict in the new family of Jesus. And then what happens when they're under stress, you just fall back to what you grew up in, whether it's blaming, whether it's passive aggressive behavior, whether it's yelling, whether it's being a false peacemaker and kind of shoveling it under the rug, and that's just like the world. And so that's why this Go Back to Go Forward is so gigantic that you can be reading the Bible, but you're living your family. That's a tragedy.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about another couple of issues. One, of course, this idea of Sabbath, because you heard Peter talking about that, and I think any leader is struggling with the fact that, it's 24/7, everything on the table, all in, never a break kind of mindset, which is certainly perpetuated not only by the church culture, but by social media. So we're going to come back and talk about that. Also going to talk about the training, because this is not something which is just plug and play. So what does that involve? And we'll get into some other aspects of this. But again, along the way, I'm just holding up every once in a while some of the various books. Here's one on the emotionally healthy relationships, one on emotionally healthy spirituality, as well as all sorts of day-by-day books and various kinds of DVDs and other resources that all come together in this Leaders Kit. You can certainly find out more on the website. It is published by Zondervan, and Peter is with us today to try to answer some of your questions. We also, of course, have a link to his website, emotionallyhealthy.org. We suggest a couple of things. First of all, you might want to take that test and see where you fall on the spectrum there between an emotional infant, an emotional child, an emotional teen, or an emotional adult in terms of those issues. There's a place where you can find whether there's maybe a course already near you, and of course some videos that you might want to watch. And as we've oftentimes suggested, watch the video and then maybe hit the share button, put it on your Facebook page, and start a conversation about some of these issues. And of course pass it on to maybe people in positions of leadership that can help with that as well. So we'll continue our conversation today with Pete Scazzero. And along the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about emotionally healthy spirituality and emotionally healthy relationships. All that coming up right after this.
From Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Risen and War Room, comes Paul, Apostle of Christ. Two men challenged an empire in order to live out the gospel of Jesus Christ and spread their message to the world.
Where sin abounds, grace abounds more.
Starring Jim Caviezel. Paul, Apostle of Christ. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at paulmovie.com.
Few of us get the chance to really make a difference, but today you have an opportunity. The question is whether you will seize it. Becoming a Truth Team partner with Point of View magnifies your impact in this generation and perhaps for many to come. When you stop what you're doing and call us or give online, you invest in hard work that has changed lives and communities for 45 years. Grab this opportunity. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Don't let this opportunity pass by. Join the team and make a difference. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation today with Pete Scazzero. And again, we're talking about the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship courses, and these involve the emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy relationships. We have a lot of links that we want to make available to you. One of those is to the emotionallyhealthy.org website. And Peter, I noticed that some of your most recent blog posts are about finding God's rhythms. And, of course, that's what you deal with in the 6th section of your emotionally healthy spirituality. And this is something that has been sort of the bane of the 20th and 21st century, because when you have electric lights, now when you have social media, it is possible to completely get out of rhythm. In the past, when it got dark, you could light a candle, but eventually you didn't stay up much later. You waited till the sun came up again, and there was rhythms of the seasons, there were rhythms of the night and day, there were rhythms of the week. We've lost so much of that, and that's why I think we have so much burnout. What do you think?
Absolutely. What we have now is a situation where we have so many people, Christians, who are living vicariously off the spirituality of other people, that it's really a crisis, because without abiding in Jesus, remaining in him, we can't bear any fruit long term. Nothing's going to really stick. So, one of the cores of this shift of what we call emotional discipleship is actually slowing down to be with Jesus, so that my life with him is sufficient to sustain what I do for him, or what I do in life. So a big thrust in silence, stillness, and scripture, rhythms in your day and rhythms in your week with Sabbath keeping. And it was really 22 years ago when I actually began to visit monasteries with the goal of saying, what can I learn here about slowing down for the sake of me living in the middle of New York City pastoring a church? And I found that there was a lot to learn. And God really met, Jerry and I in that process we really did learn about rhythms. That is the word. How do I have a rhythm in my days and my weeks and my years when the culture doesn't know anything about rhythms? But it's revolutionary once you begin to tap into it, because you realize, God created me for rhythms. And God worked 6 days, he rested. He had a Sabbath. And when he gives a Sabbath command, for example, in Deuteronomy, he says, you were slaves in Egypt before. You worked 7 days a week for 400 years. Your whole worth and value was in doing. But you're no longer a slave, you're free. And so he invites them, as Jesus said, to receive a gift of Sabbath for a 24-hour period every week. It's revolutionary, actually, for one's life.
Fascinating. Again, even one of your comments on the website, one of the greatest scandals in the church is that so many people live vicariously off the spirituality of others, and certainly that's part of that fast-paced, frenetic lifestyle that we have. Yeah. But before we go any further, let's, if we can, talk to some of the people that might want to actually develop this in the church. I know that we have pastors that listen to this program. We have seminary students. We have Bible fellowship leaders, small group leaders, and others. And again, they might be tempted to go get the leader's kit from Zondervan or from you and just plug and play. But you recognize how important it is to prepare for the course, to plan for the course, to promote it, to train, and then to run it. So talk about those preliminary steps before it actually is implemented in the church or small group.
Yeah. So thank you. It's a great question. I love the church. I've been a pastor around for 30 years and am committed to the church being a countercultural community that's really salt and light in the world. And so if we're going to really move people into discipleship that deeply changes lives, that means it's got to start with us as leaders. And so we're bringing in something that's not just like, let's get together, let's have a little Bible study, have dinner together, ask a few questions. That's nice. It's fellowship. It connects people. It's good for pastoral care. It's light discipleship. But in this world in which we're living, with the kind of pressure that of secularism coming against every believer, with our own internal draw, moved away from Jesus, besides powers and principalities, we need a robust discipleship. And so yes, we put this together. Really, this is a culmination of 22 years of producing materials. But we said we got to get it in one package. So then we got to provide a training. So what we do is we want you to live it a little bit before you do it. So in other words, you just don't take it and start doing it. We want you to start doing it yourself first as the point leader. And so we train, we do a little training, and we do the training. We say, the foundation of the courses is what we call these day-by-day devotionals, or really it's the daily office. It's people learning to stop to be with Jesus twice a day and actually having some silence built into it and stillness before the Lord. That's the most radical part of the course is being still before the Lord, which is a command, Mm-hmm. But we want people to actually experience the Bible, not just talk about it. So that's the foundation. So you learn, how do I lead people in that? How do I do it myself, and how do I lead others into it? Then the topics we're talking about are big topics like enlarge your soul through grief and loss, or go back to go forward, or journey through the wall. But if you can't talk about it in your own life, how are you going to help other people do it? So the training is meant to give you an orientation of how to bring this in. It's slow. This is not quick, but it's powerful. And so the reason we want some access, and the wonderful thing about technology is you can watch me lead a session, and then we talk about the 5 core ingredients that make a great course, because we're not looking for a program. Programs don't change people. Life on life changes people. I can't give what I don't possess. I can only give what I do possess. And so we recognize that the level of the person who's leading this, the point leader, that they have it in his or her life is the level it's going to be able to go into other people's lives. So we'd rather go slow, but it's like the mustard seed, right, of the kingdom of God. It's going to have a long-term effect.
Yes. Well, and one of the friends of this ministry is Howard Hendricks, and he used to have a phrase that, if your spirituality isn't working for you, don't export it. And you've got this great diagram in your workbook on relationships, where on the left-hand side you've got brokenness, on the right-hand side you have wholeness, and you go from defensive to approachable, from isolation to certainly being part of the situation, from anger to delight, from fear to courage, from dishonesty to honesty. And the bottom line is that if your leader is broken, then that brokenness gets exported to the congregation. If it's misty in the pulpit, it's foggy in the pews. And so it seems to me that sometimes the first key is to get the leader right, whoever that might be. It could be the pastor, it could be a Sunday school leader, it could be a small group leader, and then they can export the positive, the wholeness, rather than the brokenness, which is part of a lot of these broken churches in America right now.
Yes, and we found that that the health and the power of this kind of discipleship can come into a church sideways, from the bottom up. It doesn't have to come from the point leader down, but if you, as your listeners, can just, you follow Jesus, you begin to make some disciples, transform lives, and it carries itself. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than people having fresh conversions in Jesus as Christ followers. It just has its own unique power. And so really, it's been our experience the last 22 years that in some ways the advertising it just carries itself, because it's people's lives being transformed. There's just nothing like it. And people are inside. People may be stuck and crippled and paralyzed, but really they're longing for Jesus. But they're in our churches right now. They're Christians, but they're stuck. And to me, we're walking in and trying to help people get to Jesus and get unstuck.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, continue for just a few more minutes. But if you would like to join with us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also encourage you to go to the website that we have linked on our website, pointofview.net, emotionallyhealthy.org. And we've talked a little bit about the emotionally healthy spirituality. The emotionally healthy relationships also cause you to take your community temperature reading, to stop mind reading and clarify expectations, to do a genogram of your family, which is sort of something we related to already, explore the iceberg, listen incarnationally, climb the ladder of integrity, fight cleanly, which we alluded to just a minute ago, and, of course, this idea of rule of life. And, again, if you're watching, of course, each one of these has a workbook like this. And then we've also mentioned the day by day. I've not held those up right now, but let me do that, because these are two kind of 40-day journeys, one dealing with emotionally healthy spirituality and the other one here, emotionally healthy relationships. And then, of course, those go with, as we mentioned just a minute ago, the DVDs and the resources that are there. So this isn't a complete package, but again, it is important for you to recognize that it's not necessarily just your classic plug and play. You need to do some work on your own. And if you would like to know more about that, again, as we've mentioned, it is available at the website pointofview.net. And if nothing else, let me just encourage you to go to that website and take that personal assessment. How do you rate? Are you an emotional infant, child, teen, or adult? I think you'll find that helpful and maybe cause you to find some areas of need and growth in your life that you need to work on as well. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Pete Scazzero right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You probably know the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers in Oregon forced out of business and fined $135,000 by the state when they politely declined business that would have forced them to violate their religious convictions. What you may not know is that after the state of Oregon pronounced them guilty of discrimination, private citizens were eager to show their contempt for the Kleins. Many of the comments they received are so vulgar that I cannot repeat them here, but here is a tame sampling. One person writing on Facebook said to the Kleins, "I hope your shop burns." Another chimed in, noting that she hoped Aaron and Melissa would burn in hell. One man sent a message that said, "I hope you lose your house and have to live on the streets." One woman even said, "We hope your children get cancer and die." When the government declares that citizens like Aaron and Melissa are not entitled to the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech, its people push aside any goodwill that allows people to coexist peacefully with beliefs with which they may disagree. Aaron and Melissa have asked the Oregon Supreme Court to review their case. We hope the court will accept the appeal, if only to remind everyone that it is possible to live peacefully as neighbors, even when we disagree. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, Peter Scazzero with us as we talk about the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship courses, and that gets you into emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy relationships. And Peter, I would imagine some people are thinking, okay, you've been doing this now for more than 2 decades. What's been the impact? What does it look like when an entire church maybe goes through the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship courses? Can you share some stories?
Yes. I mean, again, it's not like you just do it up front and you preach a series of sermons on it and then everyone has done it. That's just kind of like, that's like going into the nursery of a church and spraying milk and saying everyone has been fed. And so, all right, all the kids have been, fed. And so, no, it's not that it takes a very long time for it to infiltrate into an entire culture and changing of a church. But we have churches that have done it. Oh, it's incredible. It's actually in 25 countries right now, and we're actually in the very early stages of bringing this to churches. Although Emotionally Healthy Discipleship has been around for a couple of decades, it's only the last year that we've been able to update the materials and get Zondervan to package it into this discipleship leaders kit for churches. So that's a new day for us. And so we've got about 300, I believe, and like 80 churches right now doing the courses in the United States and North America. But this stuff's only been out like 6 months. But we have some early adopters who've been in it for a few years. It's all been oral through contact with us and scattered materials, putting it together. But here's what it looks like. I mean, you've got a much more everything has changed in the church. I mean, the leadership, the board is functioning in a much more anchored way in Jesus. There's a lot more peace. There's a tremendous amount of fruit because people are connecting to Jesus in a firsthand way during the week. So when they come together, the worship has changed. You're not pulling people. You're not trying to push people to do things in the church because there's a life in Jesus that's been tapped into. So now it's got its own energy. It's got its own life force. If anything, you're trying to contain it to as a leader, to a focused place, to all be on the same page. The relationships are transformed. I mean, our church doesn't have like big conflicts because we're equipping people to resolve them along the way. There's a new language that we're committed to. We've got a new language and a new culture of how we function as a new family of Jesus. We've got 73 nations in our church here in Queens. So people come from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Mideast, Europe, and everyone can justify pathology by saying, oh, that's my culture, that's my culture. But we're able to come together because we say, no, we're committed to living under Scripture and following Jesus. And so we function as a new culture. That's a way that transcends all of our cultures and families in the new family of Jesus. And so what EH discipleship has given us is a language. And so it's not something you do once and, oh, I got it. No, it's something that gets reinforced in the culture. So, yeah, you learn a skill like clean fighting. But it's when you're in a conflict with someone in the church, like 3 months later, that you actually have to pull it out and do it. And so the goal actually is not just that people do the course once, it's that they actually live it in the culture. So our prayer and hope is that leadership really gets it, and that thus is reinforcing it. But it's a wonderful, our church is very active. We've got a lot going on, for example. We've got 1,500 adults, but it's not frenetic. There's lots of ministry going on, but there's a sense of, people are living in rhythms. There's a sense of joy. There's a commitment to mission, but it's out of a centered place with Jesus. And so it's a very wonderful place to be a countercultural community for Jesus as a church.
Well, and as you say, it really gets to the leader because the church leader, whoever that might be, and it might be in different venues because it might be in a small group, might be in a Sunday school class, might be an entire church, that leader really needs to work on his or her kind of relationships and spirituality first because, as you said, they are going to be passing that on and doing that in a discipleship way. So really the key, as you've mentioned, of course you talk about that in your earlier book, The Emotionally Healthy Leader anyway, but also this idea of the emotionally healthy church are all really kind of tied up in having it work organically from biblical and scriptural principles.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And we're not saying you have to have it all together. I don't have it all. I'm growing and learning all the time. And so we're all broken, right? We're poor in spirit. We're broken, but at least we're on a journey and we're honest about it. I think that's what we ask people to, we want to be kind of like an AA, group. I'm powerless. We're all broken in spirit, broken people, growing in Jesus. And I think that's the kind of beginning one needs to have to get into this discipleship. If you want to pretend, and if you're into pretending or trying to impress people, this is not for you. This really is a very broken, weak, dependent model of living life, and dependent on Jesus. So it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, what your culture or race is, or what part of the world you're from. it's coming to the feet of Jesus and saying, I'm going to be a disciple, a follower, and this is my life. And I'm going to integrate it into my family, my parenting, my work, my recreation. Everything I do is going to be, transformed by Jesus.
Well, again, we have all sorts of resources available to you on our website, pointofview.net, but we can just point you to the emotionallyhealthy.org website, and you'll find lots of great material. And, Peter, if people have, by chance, any questions or they wanted to maybe kind of get some next steps, they can contact you through that website, can't they?
Absolutely. Or even contact us with info at emotionallyhealthy.org. We have coaches, pastors who actually will help you customize, how do I bring this to my church or ministry, whether you're a parachurch or a church. And so you get in touch with them. Once you get on that map and you contact us, one of our coaches will contact you. It's free to help you customize, how do I do this in my situation? That's our ministry, is to serve you, because, God gave this to us, and we want to give it away and be good stewards of that. So that's our ministry at emotionallyhealthy.org. You contact us, or contact me through Twitter or Facebook at Pete Scazzero, and I'll respond to you. But most importantly, I want to get you in touch with some of our folks or coaches to serve you in doing this.
Well, again, just great resources published by Zondervan, and we have all sorts of information about it on the website, pointofview.net, and, of course, a link to emotionallyhealthy.org. So, Peter, thank you so very much for joining us today, and thank you for these many years that you've worked in this very important area of developing emotionally healthy disciples inside and outside the church. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you for the privilege. It's been great to be with you, and greatly appreciate it.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, it is, of course, Holy Week, as we've already alluded to, and we are going to have in studio with us, as we've had many times in the past, Dr. Tim McGrew. He is the chairman of the philosophy department at Western Michigan University. We're going to talk about, of course, the resurrection. But, of course, last time he was with us, he told us a little bit about how to evaluate miracles. And if you've ever been with us, he's also talked about some of the undesigned coincidences we find in the Scriptures, which I think are just another very good argument for the authority and inspiration of Scripture. So we'll have a chance to chat with him about those issues. And if you'd like to join us and ask questions, make comments, maybe have some questions about philosophy or apologetics, that's always something we enjoy doing with him as well. So that will be coming up in the next hour. He'll be in studio, and of course you can watch it and listen to it and even pass it on to your friends if indeed some of the material would be helpful to them in terms of their spiritual growth, or maybe even opportunities to maybe challenge their unbelief. So again, all sorts of resources available at our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to listen to any of these broadcasts again, we do have, of course, a podcast. That's an opportunity for you to listen to it. We also, of course, are on the YouTube channel, so you can send that to other individuals. Of course, you can follow us right now on our live stream, and you can also, of course, follow us on Facebook Live. So there are just a number of ways that you can benefit from some of the things we'll be talking about in studio the next hour as we talk with Dr. Tim McGrew. We need to take a break. We will come back right after this.
From PureFlix comes God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Even in life's darkest valleys, a small flame can light the way toward healing and hope.
We are called to be a light in the darkness.
Starring David A.R. White and John Corbett. God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 30th. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
Christians are called to have answers. Answers for those who doubt our faith, and answers for those going through difficult times. Thanks to our Truth Team members, Point of View provides those answers. You can play a vital role in bringing truth to the pressing issues of our day and truth when life doesn't seem fair. Help shine a light in darkness by giving today. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Do not miss or minimize how much of a difference you can make. Take just a couple of minutes and join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We have in studio with us today an individual that you've heard before if you've been listening to Point of View, Dr. Tim McGrew. He's been on a number of times with us, and as the chairman of the philosophy department at Western Michigan University, an individual that brings so much to the table. And I remember, I think the first time we ever had him in studio, we talked about some of the undesigned coincidences where you'll have something that's sort of a question mark in one of the Gospels, and if you look at one of the other Gospels, it answers that question. And his wife, Linda McGrew, took some of that material and produced this book, which I would highly recommend, Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidences in the Gospels and the Acts. Book of Acts, fascinating, just fascinating work. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. And also, you might remember the last time we had him in studio, we talked about miracles, and he came up with this acrostic, DOUBT, D-O-U-B-T, and that is how to evaluate miracles. I've posted a commentary that I wrote on that on the website, but I thought it'd be good today, since we're in Holy Week, to talk about the resurrection. But Dr. Tim McGrew, it is always great to have you in studio.
Thanks so much, Kerby. Great to be here.
I might mention some of your academic books in just a few minutes. And, of course, I've seen your citations and things like the Encyclopedia of Philosophy and everything. And chairman of the department, it's just great to have somebody of your Christian conviction and intellectual stature at a major university. So it's just great to see that. And you're in town because you've been speaking to some of the student groups, right?
I am. I've been speaking at a conference at Southwestern Seminary, and then to many other groups, including the Atheist Christian Book Club. The atheists said they'd like to have me for dinner. So that was a fun time. They grilled me hard, but it was a cordial event. This is the 15th of my engagements here, and then I'm flying out tonight. So.
Yes, well, I know that, and back to Kalamazoo, and I hope to see you up there sometime, because sometimes I'm over at Gull Lake just down the road there, and love to meet your wife. Never had, but first of all, congratulations for the book. That is just outstanding. And you worked on it, but at the same time, she wrote all of it. So I think it was, if I remember right, it was whoever has free time first gets to write the book. So she wrote the book.
That's right. She wrote the whole thing, but I was the one who introduced her to the argument, and then she took the ball from there and did just a bang-up job. So that book, Hidden in Plain View, by my wife Lydia, is the best thing out there right now on this subject.
And I remember even later on that you had found some books back in the 19th century that had written about this as well. Undesigned scriptural coincidences, the four Gospels from a lawyer's standpoint, just all of, a number of things. But you have updated that. And again, if I can just give you lots of accolades, as if you need one more, you've actually gone back and found some of these other works, apologetic works, theological works, and updated that and provided that in a website for people to find as well, haven't you?
That's right. That's the Library of Historical Apologetics at historicalapologetics.org. And everything there is free. We literally don't have anything to sell you. You want it, download it.
Yeah, again, most of those are outlived their copyright, so that's one of the things that makes it so nice about some of these great classic works. Well, again, we could talk about that all day, but I want to talk about the resurrection. And the first question is, how do we kind of put this together? You have this very good logical mind to help us kind of think about how to put some of the arguments for the resurrection. And this week is a great opportunity for people to invite their non-Christian friends to church. People rarely will come to church, but maybe on Christmas, maybe on Easter, or just have a conversation about the resurrection. So help us out. How do we kind of think our way through this?
The way that I like to approach it is to say that we should examine this like we would examine any historical event. When you're examining a historical event, you want to identify the relevant facts, and then you want to say, what is the best explanation of those facts. So to identify the facts, there's step number one, and I've got a short list. There are more things one could add to it, but I've got a list that I've tried to put together in a memorable way. And then we want to look at the structure of the explanations, and that's where the logic comes in, because you don't want to leave something out. You want to cover the map there so that by the time you're done comparing things, you're sure there's nothing else waiting in the wings to come in and do a better job.
That's right. And again, let me encourage you to take some notes. If you go to the commentary that I did, that was back in January, we used the word doubt, D-O-U-B-T. This one, we're going to use the word alive, A-L-I-V-E. So you might put an A-L-I-V-E down the page, and then kind of work our way through how we can begin to think through each one of those issues.
Sure. So the first of the relevant facts that I like to draw people's attention to is that we have reports of appearances, and there's your A, of Jesus after his death to his followers. I'm not trying to beg the question, as they would say. I'm not trying to assume by saying this that Jesus had been raised from the dead, but we do have these reports. Make of them what you will. The claim was that Jesus appeared alive. And the claims are very specific and very detailed, and so it's interesting to look into the Gospels and see the nature of these. He appears to groups of people. He interacts with them. It's not just sight, it's also sound and in some cases touch. So there are these multiple sensory modalities being invoked in these appearances. And we have these in the Gospels. We also are told about them in the book of Acts. We read about them in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So there's multiple attestation for these appearances of Jesus to his disciples.
Well, again, I know I'm maybe jumping ahead, but sometimes when we even talk about appearances, the first comment I get back on a college campus or other places is, well, I think they're just hallucinations. Well, the trouble with that is I've never seen a mass hallucination. You and I may be hallucinating right now that we're in Hawaii, but not everybody listening to this is having the same hallucination.
Yeah, and probably if you're hallucinating, you're in Hawaii, I'm hallucinating, I'm in bed, so it's not likely to overlap.
So that's the A, which is appearances. What about the L?
Now, the L is one that I like to use, although it surprises most people. The L stands for low status of women.
Yes.
It's a funny thing to notice how women were treated in the first century in Palestine within Judaism. I'll read a couple of quotations on this, and they're kind of scary in a sense, but don't shoot the messenger, please. Here's one. Let no one talk with a woman in the street. No, not with his own wife. Well, that would make meal planning awkward, I think.
Yes.
Here's another. Let the words of the law be burned, says Rabbi Eliezer, rather than committed to women.
Wow.
And then when it came to the testimony of women, here are a couple. Let not the testimony of women be admitted on account of the levity and boldness of their sex. Josephus is in his Antiquities, Book 4. Sorry, ladies, you are just too funny and you're too bold. What are we going to do with it? Any evidence which a woman gives is not valid, says the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah 1.8c. So really, thinking about it, if you were to make up a story and you wanted to persuade people that it was true, you'd want to associate it with high prestige sources. Who were the first people at the empty tomb in all four Gospels? Women.
Women.
Right. You'd be shooting yourself in the foot if you were making it up, but if it really went down that way, well, then maybe you'd say it.
Yes, and again, that's one of those sort of uncomfortable facts that I think really help. As we've said before, another argument for the truthfulness of the gospel is they don't leave anything out. You see Peter denying Christ, and you have people having questions, you have egos, you have all sorts of other things. So we've only given you the A and the L of alive, but we also have to take a break. So when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation today with Dr. Tim McGrew, and it is an opportunity for you to, first of all, hear some of the facts, some of the possible explanations, and then take a little bit of time to, if you want, ask a question or make a comment, and we'll try to answer that so what question. So if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about Dr. Tim McGrew, we are pleased to say that we have quite a bit of information about him today. We have historicalapologetics.org. We just mentioned that a minute ago, so that's on the website. We have a PDF file for you to follow, one of my commentaries on him, and so it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll continue talking about Alive right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Can a state government compel speech? That is a question that surfaced in the Supreme Court case involving a Christian baker. It came up again last week when the same court heard oral arguments about a California law that compels pro-life pregnancy centers to promote abortion. Pro-life people with religious objections to abortion run these centers. But this case is much more than a religious liberty case. It is fundamentally a First Amendment free speech case. The law forces the pro-life centers to provide free advertisement for abortions through their posters and their websites. You would think that a federal court would strike down the law, but not the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that columnist George Will reminds us has reasoning that is frequently novel and rulings that are frequently reversed. To show the problem with the law, he poses this hypothetical. Suppose a pro-life state government were to require all publicly and privately funded abortion providers to advertise on their premises the locations and services of crisis pregnancy centers, or even to post the following accurate information on their premises, websites, and advertisements. That would be such facts as the baby's brain forms after 18 days. The heart begins to beat after 13 weeks, and the brain waves are detected after 6 weeks. At 7 weeks, the baby is kicking. At week 9, the baby can suck its thumb. At 26 weeks, the spinal cord and pain receptors are in place and the baby can feel pain. Of course, the abortion providers would howl with anger at such requirements, but essentially that is what the California legislature did by requiring pro-life pregnancy centers to promote abortion. Hopefully, the High Court will understand that this is an important free speech issue and strike down the California law. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films, Paul, Apostle of Christ, starring Jim Caviezel, rated PG-13, now playing. Information at paulmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us, Dr. Tim McGrew, and again, chairman of the philosophy department at Western Michigan University there in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and an individual that has written quite a number of technical pieces, as well as, again, I might just mention one more time, the book by your wife, Linda McGrew, and Lydia McGrew, I should say, and it's called Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidence in the Gospels and Acts. Well, I'm talking about your wife. Let me talk about you and your daughter. You were a chess champion, and now I understand your daughter is. Tell us the rest of the story.
That's right. Yeah, back in the day in 2006, I was the Michigan co-champion, and I've trained my daughter, several of our tournament players. My 19-year-old this year is the Michigan women's chess champion.
Unbelievable.
So it's all in the family. There is another Skywalker.
There is another Skywalker, and boy, and you can play chess blindfolded.
Yeah, that's all of us can do that. My daughter, who's the champion, has been doing that since she was 10 years old.
You people are made of something I don't even understand, but that is so impressive. So just one more thing to know about the McGrew family. Wouldn't you like to be around that dinner table, with all the conversations they have about philosophy, chess, and everything else? If you just joined us, we're talking with Dr. Tim McGrew about the resurrection. We're looking at some of the facts first, and we've used the word alive. So A stands for appearances. L, we talked about the low status of women, and we managed to alienate even women in the audience now by reading from some of the things like the Talmud and Josephus and others. Let's get to the I. I stands for what? Immediate proclamation.
That's right. It's a really important fact that the resurrection was proclaimed in the place and at the time that it was supposed to have taken place. If you have an unfriendly audience, the best thing for you to do when you say something they're not going to like is to get away from them, either get away in space or get away in time. Jim Jones went down to Guyana to get away from prying eyes, and he was able to keep his little cult going there until they all drank the Kool-Aid. But the Christians set it right out in the streets, right in Jerusalem, while the same Jewish leaders were still in charge, while the same Romans were still in charge. That is not the way to win friends and influence people if you're trying to start a new religion, because they have means, motive, and opportunity to come down on you and falsify what you are saying.
Yes.
So that's not the way that every religious claim gets made, but this one was immediately proclaimed in the place where the enemies of Christianity were ready to try to strangle it in its cradle.
Immediate proclamation, and it relates to something we may get to later. If nothing else, people can see it on the commentary on miracles, because doubts, the D stood for distant events.
That's
some
exactly
of these miracles
right.
that happen elsewhere, well, it's easy to say it happened over there when it didn't happen in front of people. So this idea of immediate proclamation, very important. A-L-I. Got two more. V, voluntary sufferings. And anybody that saw the Apostle Paul here, Paul the Apostle this weekend, the new movie that's out, just a reminder again of the incredible sufferings that many of not only the disciples but the other followers went through.
That's right. And they went through these sufferings not because they couldn't help it, but because they chose to stick with this little movement that was growing, that was proclaiming that every other religion was wrong. This is an exclusive claim. Even the Jews had it wrong and crucified their own Messiah. Wow, again, you're really putting a finger in the eye of each of the other possible groups, and those are the groups in power. They hold all of the cultural trump cards. But many people who profess to be original witnesses of the risen Christ voluntarily passed their lives in labors and dangers and sufferings and submitted to new rules of conduct, worshiping on Sunday. No longer, when the animal sacrifice system went away, the Christians kept right on going. They gave up the Jewish nationalist aspirations of a Messiah who would come in military power. This was a remarkable change, and they did it all voluntarily, with really no earthly rewards. I sometimes have people say to me, well, maybe they did it for money. No, actually, this was not the route to riches. Maybe they did it for sex. If you were into it for the sex, the Roman religions offered you everything your depraved heart could want.
Yeah.
The Christians were notoriously not offering you anything in this world, but they had the truth.
Yes, that's for sure. And again, you're familiar with Sean McDowell. He did his doctoral dissertation out in a book called The Fate of the Apostles, just to remind us of what happened to them. Of course, there have been lots of stories. He's tried to trace down some of those. And again, when you look at what the disciples and the apostles suffered, you can see that that was voluntary sufferings. And so, again, A-L-I-V, E stands for the empty tomb.
It does, and this is a really important fact. Most scholars, not just conservative Christian scholars, accept that the tomb was found empty on Sunday morning. There are a couple of reasons for that. They accept it because it's attested in multiple ways, and they accept it because there's this embarrassing fact that on the morning of the resurrection, it's women who are at the tomb. But it's also attested in a wonderful indirect way. Justin Martyr in the 2nd century says to Trypho in his dialogue with Trypho, you guys are still going around from town to town saying that the disciples stole the body. Well, that's a beautiful admission. They didn't have the body to show anybody, right? Yeah. Why would you make up the excuse that they stole it if you had the body? Look, you remember his beard and his hair? Here it is. But no, they didn't have it. The tomb was empty. And that actually is one of the things that helps us to eliminate some of the alternative possible explanations for these facts.
Right. And again, as we can see, that's inscripturated because you actually have the first, if you will, attempt to explain away the resurrection. But they had to do that by admitting, sort of in a backhanded way, the empty tomb. So if you're just joining us and haven't written all these down, A stands for appearances. L stands for the low status of women. I stands for immediate proclamation. V for voluntary sufferings. And E for empty tomb. That's alive. Okay, now we have some time, Dr. Tim McGrew, to talk about possible explanations. Take us down that logic tree for just a minute.
I will. I like logic. I teach logic sometimes, and so I like to break these things down in a way that's really clear and that shows us that there are no options being left out. So here's the way I like to frame it. Either the first witnesses made these claims about their encounters with the risen Jesus, or they didn't. Have I lost anybody so far? All right, they did, or they didn't.
Straightforward.
Suppose they did. Then Because if they didn't, then Christianity is a myth, right? So there's our option number one. If they did, we have another question. Either what they claimed was true or it was false. Which was it? If it was false, then we've got two more options. Either it was false and they knew it was false. That's deception.
Right.
If you know it's false and you say it, then you're deceiving. If it was false but they didn't know it, then they were themselves deceived.
Yeah.
And the only option left over is it was true. And that's what we call Christianity.
Yeah, that's 1 Corinthians 15 and others. And so let's kind of work our way through. The first one is either that what they said, these first witnesses made their claims, and if it was true or was not true, that's the issue of a myth. How do we respond to this idea of it being a myth?
So myths are really interesting things. You can start a rumor anytime, but to supplant the truth, that takes time because you have to wait until the people who care about it and know about it are no longer in the way. Well, think about the immediate proclamation. There's not time there for a myth to grow up. And so they're just all of the facts give some trouble to some of these hypotheses, but this is one where you can just see right away a myth, in order to grow up and cover over what really happened, would take maybe decades at least. Strauss thought it would have had to be a couple of generations, and that's why he thought the Gospels had to be really late. No time for that. It was being proclaimed right at ground zero there, right at the time. So the myth option isn't going to fly as an explanation for the facts.
Well, again, time is not available to you. There used to be an idea that the Gospels were written down in the 2nd century, and so there's lots of time for a myth. But just think this through. Imagine if somebody were to say, the first year that President Barack Obama was in office, they were going to feed all the people on the South Lawn, but they didn't have enough food. So this little boy with a lunchbox handed this lunchbox to the president, and he was able to feed 5,000 on the White House lawn. Everybody go, no, I was there. That's not the way it happened. I saw the food trucks. There's just too many possibilities for counter arguments. And so myth works if you've got lots of time, but the immediate proclamation and the early recording of the Gospels eliminate that, don't they?
Absolutely.
Well, let's take a break. We've got a few more options here and possible explanations. Along the way, though, if you'd like to join our conversation, we are privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Tim McGrew. And by the way, if you would like to listen to this again, let me encourage you to download the podcast and send it to a friend, maybe even an unsaved friend. Or if you'd like to watch it again, we, of course, have this being posted on our YouTube channel. And, of course, it's also being recorded on Facebook Live, so you can watch it there and pass it on to others. But again, if you haven't written down alive, appearances, low status of women, immediate proclamation, voluntary sufferings, empty tomb, as we've looked for possible explanations, I think we've eliminated the myth. Well, what about deceivers and deceived? A lot more to cover, and we will do that in just a few minutes. All that available, by the way, at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, and we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Tim McGrew right after this.
From Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Risen and War Room, comes Paul, Apostle of Christ. Two men challenged an empire in order to live out the gospel of Jesus Christ and spread their message to the world.
Where sin abounds, grace abounds more.
Starring Jim Caviezel. Paul, Apostle of Christ. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at paulmovie.com.
Few of us get the chance to really make a difference, but today you have an opportunity. The question is whether you will seize it. Becoming a Truth Team partner with Point of View magnifies your impact in this generation and perhaps for many to come. When you stop what you're doing and call us or give online, you invest in hard work that has changed lives and communities for 45 years. Grab this opportunity. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Don't let this opportunity pass by. Join the team and make a difference. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour as we have in studio with us today Dr. Tim McGrew. And again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the resurrection. We'll get to some of the other possible explanations in a moment. But let me again point you to a couple of websites. One, historicalapologetics.org, and then Project 360, spelled out.org. We'll have that link up there as well. And while we're talking about some of those great resources, I mentioned your wife's book, Lydia McGrew. I understand there's a little bit of a competition. We're in the midst of March Madness right now, by the way. Congratulations to Michigan.
Thank you. So far.
And Chicago Loyola and Kansas and a couple of others. But there's a competition about books. So talk about that. People can actually vote for that.
So Baker Bookhouse in Grand Rapids, Michigan is having a little bit of competition. They put some books out in the brackets and paired them up. And people could go in and vote for their favorite book. They didn't have to vote in every category, just something that you know is good that you could click the button for. And so far, there have been we're into the third round now, and Lydia's book is in the third round. Each book that advances, they discount it a few more percent. So it's at a 15% discount right now. And if you like it and you go in and you vote for it and it wins, it'll move on to the next round. So if you're into apologetics, this would be a way you could show your support.
Fascinating book, and again, I appreciate you bringing it up. The very first time I met you face-to-face, we were talking about that, and then the book came out, and we've talked about many of the other resources as well. If you're just joining us, we talked about the various facts for the resurrection using the word alive: appearances, low status of women, immediate proclamation, voluntary sufferings, and empty tomb. Then we've talked about kind of a logic tree. We've looked at the fact that Christianity can't be a myth. It just doesn't work because there's not enough time for a myth. It's an immediate proclamation of the gospel. We have the early records in the gospel. So we're down to a couple of other possibilities. Okay, it's false. Either the disciples knew that it was false, and that makes them deceivers. I don't find a lot of people want to land on that, because usually they say these people went out and died for a lie. Sure, a lot of people died for a lie, but they didn't know it was a lie. But you don't have conspiracies breaking up so much. So how do we get to that one about whether or not disciples are deceivers? That one we can take pretty quickly, can't we?
I think we can. You know, that was more popular back in the early 18th century, and it got shot down really effectively by some of the great defenders of Christianity in that era. Still, you know, this is the era of the Internet, and yes, sometimes people say silly things on the Internet.
Do they ever?
Once in a while.
Yes.
So I think that the thing that shoots this one down most directly and effectively is just the fact that you've got this story about women coming to discover Jesus. This is so funny and so silly. If you knew that it was false, why in the world would you write the story that way? N.T. Wright, the British historian, New Testament scholar, says to put Mary Magdalene in there is from the point of view of Christian apologists wanting to explain to a skeptical audience that Jesus really did rise from the dead, like shooting themselves in the foot. But, he goes on, to us as historians, this kind of thing is gold dust. The early Christians would never have made this up.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit any kind of critical kind of evaluation, what I call the straight face test. You just can't say that with a straight face. So we're kind of running out of options here. We've eliminated myth. We've eliminated that they were deceivers. Okay, I've seen some people say, well, they were just deceived. They just somehow were missing the Messiah, missing Jesus, and so somehow they self-deceived themselves. How about that?
Yes, deceived themselves, were subject to hallucinations. I've even seen versions of this saying maybe aliens came and tricked them into thinking this. The alien hypothesis I just set aside. You can't have a conversation with people like that. You can just say, so How do you fold your tinfoil hat? But when it comes to people who want to say they had hallucinations, then we want to look at the facts, and we want to say, is this really a good explanation for the facts? Again, we have these detailed appearances that are recorded, not assuming that it was the real Jesus for the fact's sake, but saying this is how people describe their experience. You don't have groups of people experiencing the same multiple sensory thing together. That's not it. But also, just throw in the empty tomb.
Yes.
Really? They couldn't see that the tomb wasn't empty, and neither could the Jewish authorities? Or nobody knew where to find it? No, I'm sorry. That one just does not explain the facts. And this is what we're after. Notice this isn't some special theological gerrymandering. We want to have the facts, and we want to look at the explanations. We're doing here what we would do for any other event in history. And when we do, the resurrection becomes a very well-attested event.
And again, we are back to 1 Corinthians 15. Now, one of the things I've seen is a weird, really weird fallback lately is the idea that, well, there really was never a Jesus. And first of all, that one's easy to set aside because even Bart Ehrman, who's hardly our friend, said, this is the most ridiculous thing in the world. We have all these historical evidence, but you have people kind of almost getting into the tinfoil hat kind of argument. But that being said, you know, you have at least one movie and some other books, and I put books in quotes, that are really trying to argue that. But even our non-Christian friends that have at least a little bit of understanding of historical documents know that you just simply can't hold to that idea.
Absolutely. You know, yesterday I was speaking at Cottonwood Creek Church, and an atheist came to the meeting. He was very respectful, very cordial. He had been one of the people at the Atheist Christian Book Club, and he showed up. He listened to my talk on the resurrection. He made only one comment at the end, and his comment was, folks, your kids are going off to college and they're looking online and they're becoming convinced that Jesus never existed. That's stupid. You need people like Tim to give a counterweight to that. So even this very outspoken atheist who's, you know, does not shy about his position wanted the Christians to know that of course there was a Jesus, and you shouldn't think that all the atheists are going down that road. So fair is fair. He and I have a serious agreement on that point.
Isn't that something? You know, and again, the significance of all of this is that we really do need to come back and talk about the resurrection. Obviously, this week we're thinking about it. It's Holy Week. We're thinking about the crucifixion and then the resurrection. But if you go back and look at the first century, this was a very resurrection-focused gospel message. And I'd love to get your comments because I've heard other people like Jeremiah Johnston and others say, you know, we've sort of gotten away from this. We don't talk about the resurrection. You do, and Lee Strobel does, and Gary Habermas does, and William Lane Craig. But there are a lot of people that never, ever mention the resurrection, and yet that was the story in the first century, wasn't it?
It was, and I think that at that point it was so fresh. If you look at the sermons in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 10, chapter 13, just over and over and over in every sermon. That's right there at the heart of the proclamation. But like some people of old, we are itching for some new thing. We want to hear something that's new. And I guess if I had to preach an Easter sermon, I'm not being asked to, but if I did, I'd probably stand up in front of the people and say, lots of folks have something new to tell you. I have something old to tell you. And that's important. That matters.
Yeah, it certainly does. And again, we don't need to be concerned about the arguments because, first of all, most of these arguments against the resurrection, first of all, some of them come from the first century, but even the more recent ones like a Passover plot or those kinds of things, those are really old and have been answered. And that brings us back to some of the work that you've done in apologetics and historical apologetics. These are not new arguments. These are old arguments that were ably answered by people who were born, died, and lived centuries sometimes before we even came onto the scene.
Absolutely. And there are some great names, Joseph Butler, William Paley, Charles Leslie, John Leland. We have forgotten these names. I sometimes ask people, do you like C.S. Lewis? Oh, everybody loves C.S. Lewis. Would you think it would be a loss if your grandchildren never heard of him? Oh, incalculable loss. Well, every generation has had great men like that, and we have forgotten most of them. So it's my privilege to be able to pull some of these names out of obscurity and to reintroduce people to them and to show them that these people really have much to offer us, and that sometimes they addressed objections centuries ago, even 16 centuries ago in one case.
Yes. Well, again, I have some books on my shelf written by individuals who set out to disprove the resurrection. Some are contemporary individuals. Others are those who lived in passed on a long time ago, but they set out to try to disprove the resurrection and then were convinced by the evidence. So that is just a brief kind of summary of the facts of the resurrection, the explanations. And I thought we'd come back and just for a short period of time, because we only have a few minutes, talk about miracles, the filter of doubts. And Dr. Timothy McGrew shared that with us a year ago, and I posted a short commentary on it. I thought we'd go into it one more time just because this is, of course, the greatest miracle. But even today, when you have the case for miracles coming up by Lee Strobel, it's just good to think about how do we evaluate these miracles and these miracle claims. We'll do that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You probably know the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers in Oregon forced out of business and fined $135,000 by the state when they politely declined business that would have forced them to violate their religious convictions. What you may not know is that after the state of Oregon pronounced them guilty of discrimination, private citizens were eager to show their contempt for the Kleins. Many of the comments they received are so vulgar that I cannot repeat them here, but here is a tame sampling. One person writing on Facebook said to the Kleins, "I hope your shop burns." Another chimed in, noting that she hoped Aaron and Melissa would burn in hell. One man sent a message that said, "I hope you lose your house and have to live on the streets." One woman even said, "We hope your children get cancer and die." When the government declares that citizens like Aaron and Melissa are not entitled to the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech, its people push aside any goodwill that allows people to coexist peacefully with beliefs with which they may disagree. Aaron and Melissa have asked the Oregon Supreme Court to review their case. We hope the court will accept the appeal, if only to remind everyone that it is possible to live peacefully as neighbors, even when we disagree. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we have in studio with us today Dr. Tim McGrew. And I just might mention, last time he was with us, we talked about a filter that you could use to evaluate miracles, and I've posted my commentary, which came out recently on evaluating miracles. And one of the things I think you're going to find helpful is that it's, again, easy to remember. Just as we talked about the resurrection with the word alive, you use the filter of doubts. Take us through real quickly. We don't have enough time to go through it in any length, but just give us an idea.
Sure. So basically, this is a filter that you can use to sort out the promising and the unpromising candidates. You know, there's so many claims out there. Where do you start?
Yeah.
Well, here's a way to start. If they fail on one or more of the points of the filter, then might still be true, but probably not the best place to start. So
yes.
Put it through the filter, see what comes out, start with that. It's a very small amount that gets through the filter. D stands for distant events. You know, if I want to make a fake miracle claim to you, one of the ways of playing it safe is to say that it's really, really far away from both of us. Then you have a hard time going and chasing it down. But again, as we saw, the resurrection was proclaimed right in Jerusalem.
Right.
Another way for me to try to sneak one past you is to claim a miracle that supports opinions that are already established. Stories of miracles seem to affirm standing opinions of those in power. Then those in power probably aren't going to go and inquire too closely. U is for uncertain events. And this one's a funny one because I think it catches a lot of Christians. They say, you know, I was garage sailing and I found just the lamp I needed. It's a God thing. Well, I have doubts about whether that's going to qualify as a miracle. Sorry about that. B is for belated reports. If the report occurs long after the supposed event, and there's no earlier report to which we're referring, then, yeah, that's a reason for doubt. So some of the miracle claims that are attributed to Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher, well, he lived around 500 BC, and the reports are written around 300 AD. So we have almost a millennium there. That's a long delay, folks.
Yes.
And then there's trivial stuff. T.H. Huxley once used the example of a centaur trotting down Piccadilly Lane, and he said he wouldn't believe it even if 12 good Englishmen told him so. Well, yeah, what would the point of that be? What doctrine is that confirming? What important truth is that underwriting that's so dissociated from anything that matters? It's just a trivial thing. It's weird, but it's not the kind of thing we'd expect God to do, right? And finally, S is for a self-serving miracle claim. Here, I mean, some of the reports, honestly, just got to say it, of Joseph Smith could be put in that category. The guy really had a knack for claiming miracles that endorsed things that were pretty much what an ordinary fallen human being would want to be doing anyway, if only he could get away with it.
So again, these are the filter of doubts. But again, if we were to use this as you just did a minute ago, but let's go through them again with the resurrection. The resurrection is, of course, one of the best attested, perhaps the best attested miracle, because like you said, distant events, well, that connects up to the I that we mentioned a minute ago about the immediate proclamation right there in Jerusalem. I mean, if you're going to proclaim Christianity, don't go to the temple steps and have Peter stand up there on the day of Pentecost and say the things that he said. And as you said, stick a finger in the eye of the Pharisees. I mean, there are other places you could have gone to try to proclaim the gospel. So distant events. What about this idea of opinions already established? I think you've already talked about that, haven't you?
Right. You know, there wouldn't have been sufferings to undergo if they had already been in charge. If the Christians were running Palestine at that time, they could have said whatever they wanted and nobody would come after them for it, but they weren't. The Christians were a new group on the scene. This was their first proclamation. Jesus is risen, and all of the people who were in power were arrayed against them. These are the very people who had just procured the crucifixion of Jesus Christ 50 days earlier. This is not the way to do it. This is not falling in line with established opinions. This is doing it in the teeth of the opposition.
Yeah. Uncertain events. What about that one?
Yeah. So, you know, we can be uncertain as to whether a rainstorm was a miraculous answer to prayer or the rain was coming anyway. It's kind of hard to be uncertain whether a dead guy coming back to life after promising to do so is really a miracle or not. Not a lot of people scratching their head saying, well, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that doesn't work so well. No. Of course, belated reports, we already talked about that because you have the immediate proclamation. So the I of alive helps you with the B of doubts. Trivial events, not a trivial event, hardly.
No, I mean, this is, if Jesus rose from the dead, it attested the most important message that we could possibly need to have. And that is, you are not right with God, not even those of you within Judaism, but you can be reconciled to God. And here's how. Mm-hmm. So the stakes couldn't be higher. This is the absolute opposite of something trivial.
And the final one, of course, self-serving events. We just talked about voluntary sufferings, right?
That's right. If you want to prove your sincerity, then the best way to do it is by maintaining your position, even though it costs you something. And the more it costs you, the more obvious it is that you're sincere. But, if you won't do that, if you refuse to do that, then, you got to fall back on the other possible explanations. There's a wonderful quotation from Antonin Scalia in an address he gave to the Mississippi College School of Law back in 1996. He says, "It is not irrational to accept the testimony of eyewitnesses who had nothing to gain. The worldly wise do not believe in the resurrection of the dead, so everything from Easter morning to the Ascension had to be made up by the groveling enthusiasts as part of their plan to get themselves martyred."
That's a great line. Let me, just before I run out of time, mention some of the resources that we've talked about, historical apologetics. This new one, we'll have that link up there in just a minute. Project 360, and that's numbered out, 360, the lettered out.
Spelled out as words,
spelled
right?
out as words, and so that's another resource that is available. We mentioned Lydia McGrew, Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidences in the Gospel and Acts. And finally, I would imagine there might be some students that would say, I've always wanted to go and study philosophy. I might even want to go to graduate school to study philosophy. If they go and study under you, what would they maybe learn, and what would be available to them?
Western Michigan University has a very highly ranked master's program. We don't do the doctorate, but we have a bang-up terminal MA. We have a fantastic placement record. Last year, 100% of our graduate students got accepted with full funding in doctoral programs, and that even included a couple who were engaged and got married. They got funding at the same place. So we do a really good job. We're a school in the analytic tradition.
Yeah.
You will get a rigorous education, and you will move on from there with the best preparation that you could want in that kind of training in philosophy. So if you're interested, definitely check into us.
Again, and be looking for the name Tim McGrew in the philosophy section, maybe not the music section, but at least the philosophy section there. And you'll see all sorts of great material, and I would encourage you to follow the links that we have provided here. And thank you for really recovering some of the great apologetic works that are just fading away that you've put there. And thank you for, in a sense, resurrecting this idea of undesigned coincidences. I think it's really one of the most powerful arguments for the internal test for the scriptures, along with, of course, the coherence of the Bible itself. And so thank you for you and your wife putting that book together.
Well, it's our privilege to bring you things that are so old, they're new.
And again, if you'd like to have Tim McGrew come and speak at your campus, he certainly has been very busy. This is, as they say in West Texas, they rode him hard and put him up wet. We're going to put him on the plane and send him back to Kalamazoo. He is certainly an outstanding, articulate individual, and certainly we would recommend that you get him to speak at your group and maybe even at your church as well. So we have all the links there on the website, pointofview.net. Tim, always great to have you in studio.
Thank you so much, Kerby.
I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. If you find yourself saying, this was really good, I didn't get all the notes down, I'd like to hear it again, or I know somebody that needs to hear it, let me encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net. We have both watch and listen. You can watch it again, or you can listen to it. You can download the podcast and send it to someone. Of course, you can also find it on the YouTube channel. All available at the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll come back tomorrow with more right after this.
From PureFlix comes God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Even in life's darkest valleys, a small flame can light the way toward healing and hope.
We are called to be a light in the darkness.
Starring David A.R. White and John Corbett.
God's Not Dead,
God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 30th. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
Christians are called to have answers. Answers for those who doubt our faith and answers for those going through difficult times. Thanks to our Truth Team members, Point of View provides those answers. You can play a vital role in bringing truth to the pressing issues of our day and truth when life doesn't seem fair. Help shine a light in darkness by giving today. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Do not miss or minimize how much of a difference you can make. Take just a couple of minutes and join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.